What King's Guard did for this special needs teen is priceless.
Absolutely
He loved
magnificent. Look
routines,
how
soft colors,
his
and
nose
quiet
is.
spaces, and he sometimes struggled when things became too loud or too fast. Simple activities that most teenagers took for granted, like going to a busy store or standing in a crowded line, could fill him with anxiety. His parents, Sarah and Daniel, understood him better than anyone. They knew when to offer comfort, when to give him space, and when to gently encourage him to try new experiences. For months, Ethan had been dreaming of visiting the royal palace. He had seen photographs of the tall, polished guards standing perfectly still, their bright uniforms shining in the sun. The ceremonial drills, the synchronized marching, and the majestic gates all fascinated him. Sometimes he would watch videos of the guards online, replaying the scenes over and over, memorizing the way they moved and the sounds of their footsteps. His parents noticed that whenever he saw those videos, his eyes would light up, and a small smile would spread across his face, a rare, pure sign of joy that made their hearts swell. Sarah and Daniel wanted to make this dream come true for Ethan. They knew that a trip to the palace could be both exciting and overwhelming, so they spent weeks planning every detail carefully. They chose a quiet weekday morning to avoid the largest crowds and packed all of Ethan's favorite items: a soft scarf for comfort, his lucky blue cap, and a small notebook where he often jotted down thoughts or drew pictures of things he loved. They even rehearsed the visit with him, talking about what he might see and what to expect, so he wouldn't feel startled by anything new. When the day finally arrived, Ethan woke up earlier than usual, his excitement barely contained. He wore his blue cap tilted slightly to the side, a hint of nervous anticipation in his eyes. As they drove toward the palace, he pressed his face against the window, scanning the streets and pointing out familiar landmarks, asking a million questions about what he would see next. His parents answered patiently, encouraging him to take deep breaths whenever he seemed anxious. Even though it was a short drive, Ethan's attention to every detail made the journey feel long but magical. As they approached the palace gates, Ethan's curiosity turned into awe. The gates towered high above him, intricately designed and shining in the morning sunlight. The guards stood perfectly still, their hats tall and polished, their expressions serious. Ethan's hands trembled slightly, a mix of excitement and nervousness. He wanted to run up and meet them, but he also remembered the advice his parents had given him about being calm and waiting patiently. He watched quietly at first, studying every movement, every detail of their uniforms. The rhythmic steps of the guards as they practiced their ceremonial drills caught his attention immediately. He leaned forward slightly, completely absorbed, forgetting the nervousness he had felt just moments before. It wasn't just the uniforms or the drills that fascinated him. Ethan was drawn to the precision, the discipline, and the way the guards seemed almost like living statues. His mind buzzed with questions. How did they stay so still? How did they march in perfect time? Did they get tired of standing so long? He whispered these questions to his parents, who smiled and explained as best as they could. Ethan nodded thoughtfully, absorbing every word. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a simple tour, but for Ethan, it was a world of discovery, a place where every movement held meaning and every detail sparked imagination. Despite his fascination, Ethan began to feel the familiar stirrings of anxiety. The crowd had grown slightly larger, and the echoes of footsteps and voices bounced off the stone walls. He tightened his grip on his notebook, the pages soft and familiar under his fingers. Sensing his unease, Sarah knelt beside him and gently suggested that they step a little to the side, away from the main crowd. Ethan nodded, trusting his mother completely. Daniel pointed out a quiet spot where they could watch without feeling overwhelmed, and together they observed the guards from a calm distance. It was then that something remarkable happened. One of the guards, Sergeant Thompson, noticed the boy who seemed both fascinated and anxious. The sergeant's keen eyes observed the way Ethan studied the drills, the small movements of his hands, the way his eyes widened with every synchronized step. Instead of simply continuing with his duty, Sergeant Thompson made a subtle gesture, a small nod of acknowledgement toward Ethan. It was nothing dramatic, but to Ethan, it felt like a personal invitation. He looked up at the tall, imposing figure and felt a flicker of comfort. Here was someone who saw him, who seemed to recognize his excitement and his nerves. Ethan's parents exchanged glances, understanding that this small connection could make all the difference. They encouraged him to approach slowly, and with tentative steps, Ethan walked closer to the line of guards. He stopped a safe distance away, unsure if he should speak or just watch. Sergeant Thompson gave him a gentle smile and pointed toward the ceremonial drills, as if inviting him to join in spirit. Ethan's face lit up. The fear he had felt moments before began to melt away, replaced by wonder and joy. For the first time that day, he felt not like an outsider, but like someone who belonged, even if only for a few magical moments. The morning passed in a blur of awe and quiet excitement. Ethan followed the drills with wide eyes, sometimes mimicking the movements with his small hands and careful steps. The guards continued their practice, aware of the boy who watched with such intensity. It was as if the rhythm of their steps and the precision of their movements had created a bridge between two worlds, one of discipline and duty, the other of curiosity and innocence. In that shared moment, Ethan's worries faded, replaced by a deep sense of connection and wonder that he would carry with him forever. By the time they left the palace, Ethan was buzzing with stories and observations. He recounted every detail to his parents. The shine of the boots, the way the guards' hats reflected the sunlight, the exact sequence of steps in the drills. His parents listened with rapt attention, amazed at the clarity with which he described everything. They could see that this visit had not only fulfilled a dream, but had also touched something deep inside Ethan, a sense of joy, confidence, and belonging that he had rarely experienced in the outside world. Even on the drive home, Ethan couldn't stop talking. His parents smiled, realizing that the memory of this day would remain with him forever. It wasn't just the palace, the uniforms, or the drills. It was the small but powerful connection he had felt with Sergeant Thompson and the other guards. It was a reminder that sometimes, the simplest acts of kindness and recognition could create moments that were truly priceless. That night, back in his room, Ethan carefully placed his notebook on the desk and opened it to a blank page. With steady hands, he began to draw the palace gates, the guards, and the tiny figure of himself standing among them, feeling safe and happy. He worked late into the night, adding every detail he could remember, from the shine on the boots to the proud stance of the guards. Each stroke of his pencil was filled with the joy of the morning, a joy that no words could fully capture. Sarah and Daniel watched from the doorway, their hearts full. They knew that while the world could sometimes feel overwhelming for their son, moments like these, moments of understanding, patience, and connection, had the power to light up his world in ways nothing else could. And they silently promised themselves to keep finding ways to bring these magical, priceless experiences into Ethan's life. One thoughtful moment at a time. The next day, Ethan could hardly sleep. His mind replayed every moment from the palace visit, the towering gates, the polished boots of the guards, and most of all, the gentle nod from Sergeant Thompson. Even the smallest detail seemed magical now, like a memory that had been painted in bright, warm colors. He woke up early, still buzzing with excitement, and began telling his parents about all the things he had noticed but hadn't mentioned yesterday. His hands moved quickly as he pointed to imaginary lines in the air, showing the rhythm of the guards' steps, the way their arms swung perfectly in time, and the way their hats reflected the sunlight. Sarah and Daniel listened carefully, smiling at his enthusiasm, amazed at how deeply he had absorbed every detail. Ethan's parents had noticed something during the visit. They realized that their son's fascination was more than just curiosity. It was a deep connection to the discipline and elegance of the guards, something that resonated with his love for patterns and order. They wanted to give him a chance to experience it more closely, but they also knew that the palace rules and strict schedules could make this difficult. They decided to write a polite letter to the palace administration, explaining Ethan's situation and his special interest in the guards. They included a few photographs from the previous visit, showing Ethan's joy and excitement. Days passed, and Ethan eagerly asked about the letter every morning. He even made little sketches in his notebook, imagining himself standing among the guards, holding a ceremonial sword and marching with perfect timing. His parents encouraged this, knowing that his imagination was a wonderful way for him to process and enjoy new experiences. They reminded him to be patient, and they praised him for expressing himself so beautifully. Ethan smiled at this, nodding with quiet determination, as though he understood that some dreams took time to come true. Then, one morning, a letter arrived from the palace. Ethan's eyes widened as his parents carefully opened it. The words inside were simple but magical. The palace had read about his visit and his love for the ceremonial guards, and Sergeant Thompson himself had requested a small, private tour for Ethan. The letter explained that the guards would show him their drills and allow him to observe and ask questions in a calm and quiet setting. Ethan could hardly believe it. He jumped up and down, hugging his parents tightly, and whispered over and over, "I get to see them again. I get to see them again." When the day finally arrived, Ethan was nervous in a way he had never been before. It wasn't fear exactly, it was the thrill of knowing that something special awaited him. His parents packed his bag with familiar comforts, just as they had done before. His favorite scarf, his blue cap, his notebook, and a few small toys that helped him stay calm. As they walked toward the palace gates, Ethan's heart raced. He looked at the guards standing at attention and noticed every detail: the shiny buttons on their coats, the straight lines of their boots, the tall black hats that seemed almost too big for their heads. Every step, every movement felt more magical than the day before. Sergeant Thompson noticed Ethan immediately. He stepped forward, his expression kind and welcoming, and offered a gentle wave. Ethan's face lit up with a huge smile. This was the same guard who had acknowledged him the previous day, and now it felt like a reunion between old friends. Sarah and Daniel walked beside him, feeling proud and relieved. They had seen how much a small gesture of kindness could mean to their son, and they knew that this day would be even more special. The guards led Ethan to a quiet section of the palace courtyard, away from the usual crowds of visitors. Here he could see the drills more clearly, without feeling overwhelmed by noise or movement. Sergeant Thompson knelt down slightly to speak to Ethan at his level, explaining how the guards prepared for their ceremonial duties, how they trained to stay perfectly still for long periods, and how they learned to march in perfect rhythm. Ethan listened with rapt attention, asking careful questions about every detail. "Do you feel tired when you stand still for so long?" he asked. "How do you keep your balance?" The guards answered patiently, smiling at his curiosity and appreciating the respect in his questions. Then came the moment that Ethan would remember forever. Sergeant Thompson offered to let him hold a ceremonial hat, carefully placing it on Ethan's head. It was a little heavy, but it felt exciting, as if he were part of the guard himself. Then, under close supervision, he was allowed to hold a ceremonial sword, feeling the cool metal in his hands and the weight of responsibility it represented. Ethan's eyes sparkled with wonder, and he couldn't stop smiling. He tried to stand as the guards did, holding his arms straight and practicing the march in small steps. Though unsteady at first, he gradually found his rhythm, giggling quietly when he felt a little off balance. The guards encouraged him with gentle words, showing patience and care. Ethan's parents watched, their hearts full of pride and emotion. They could see the joy on his face, the way his nervous energy had transformed into confidence and excitement. The experience was more than a visit. It was a bridge to a world that Ethan had always admired from a distance. Here, he was not just an observer but a participant, even if only in small ways. He felt included, recognized, and valued in a way that left a lasting impression on his young mind. As the morning progressed, Ethan continued to observe, practice, and ask questions. He noticed the smallest details, the way the guards adjusted their hats, the rhythm of their footsteps, and even the tiny glint of sunlight reflecting off their boots. He copied movements carefully in his notebook, drawing step-by-step sketches of the drills, as if recording his own version of the ceremony. Sergeant Thompson occasionally checked his sketches, nodding in approval, and Ethan beamed at the recognition. These moments of connection, simple, quiet, and thoughtful, made Ethan feel proud, brave, and truly happy. During a short break, Ethan sat on a bench with his parents, still holding the ceremonial sword in his lap. He talked nonstop about what he had learned and seen. "They are so precise, Mom. Every movement counts. And they never get angry or upset even when someone watches them," he said, his voice full of wonder. Sarah smiled and gently reminded him that the guards were people, too. They trained hard and practiced for years, just like Ethan practiced his routines and hobbies. Daniel added that patience, respect, and attention to detail could make even the most challenging things enjoyable. Ethan nodded thoughtfully, absorbing the lessons in his own quiet way. As the visit drew to a close, Sergeant Thompson knelt down once more, giving Ethan a small, meaningful nod. "You did very well today, Ethan," he said. "Remember, courage is not about being the tallest or the strongest. It's about trying, learning, and enjoying the journey." Ethan's face lit up with a bright, proud smile. He felt important, capable, and brave in a way he hadn't before. It wasn't about performing perfectly. It was about being seen, valued, and encouraged. On the drive home, Ethan couldn't stop talking. He told his parents every little thing he had learned, every movement he had tried, and every smile he had received. His parents listened with love and amazement, realizing that these moments had created a deep and lasting memory. It wasn't just about the palace or the guards. It was about connection, understanding, and the joy of discovery. Ethan felt seen, respected, and inspired, and his parents felt the power of small, thoughtful acts of kindness. That night back at home, Ethan opened his notebook and began to draw again. He drew the guards, their shiny boots, their tall hats, and himself practicing the march. Each line and shape reflected not only what he had seen, but also how he had felt: nervous, excited, brave, and happy. His parents peeked in quietly, smiling at his dedication and joy. They knew that this experience was more than a memory. It was a turning point in his young life, a moment that would encourage him to explore, learn, and believe in his own abilities. As Ethan carefully finished his drawing, he looked up and whispered softly, "I want to see them again someday." Sarah and Daniel exchanged smiles, knowing that someday they would try, and that the memory of today would stay with Ethan forever. The guards had not only shared their world, but had also shown a young boy that patience, kindness, and understanding could create moments of magic. It was a reminder that small gestures, sometimes as simple as a nod, a smile, or a shared moment, could have an impact far greater than anyone could imagine. And as Ethan lay down to sleep, the ceremonial swords and hats still vivid in his imagination, he dreamed of a world where he could always explore, learn, and feel proud. A world where people noticed him, encouraged him, and made him feel special. A world where kindness was the most powerful form of magic, and he knew, deep in his heart, that he had experienced it that very morning. Ethan woke up the next morning still thinking about the previous visit. His notebook lay open on the desk, filled with sketches of ceremonial drills, guards, uniforms, and small notes about the precise steps he had learned. He traced the drawings again with his fingers, remembering the way the sunlight had reflected off the guards, boots, and the gentle smile from Sergeant Thompson that had made him feel seen and important. For Ethan, the memory was not just a picture in his mind. It was alive, like something he could almost touch. He turned to his parents, eyes bright, and said, "Can we go back today? I want to try again." Sarah and Daniel smiled at his excitement. They understood that this trip was becoming more than a simple visit. It was a way for Ethan to build confidence, explore his interests, and feel a sense of belonging in a world that often felt overwhelming to him. They reminded him gently that visiting the palace again required patience and careful planning, just like before. Ethan nodded solemnly, understanding that some things in life required preparation and respect. He packed his bag carefully, placing his blue cap, soft scarf, and notebook inside. He even brought a small timer that helped him manage moments when he felt anxious, a tool that gave him a sense of control in new situations. As they approached the palace gates, Ethan's heart raced with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The familiar sight of the tall gates and polished guards filled him with awe, but he also felt the familiar flutter of nerves. This time, however, he was better prepared. He took deep breaths, focusing on his scarf and the soft rhythm of his footsteps as he walked toward the courtyard. Sergeant Thompson noticed him immediately and offered a warm smile, nodding in recognition. Ethan returned the smile shyly, feeling proud that he was remembered. The guards led Ethan and his parents to a special area of the courtyard that had been set aside for him. It was quiet, away from the usual crowd of tourists, and the sunlight fell in soft patterns across the stone floor. Ethan's eyes sparkled as he observed the ceremonial drills once more, now with the added knowledge and confidence from his previous visit. He watched how the guards moved in perfect synchronization, how each step and gesture had a purpose, and how even the smallest detail mattered. He felt a deep sense of connection, as though he were part of their world, even from a distance. Sergeant Thompson knelt beside Ethan and spoke softly, explaining the history behind the ceremonial drills and the importance of discipline, focus, and respect. Ethan listened carefully, absorbing every word. He asked questions about the meaning of each movement, the time it took to learn the drills, and how the guards practiced their routines every day. The sergeant answered patiently, appreciating the boy's curiosity and respect. Ethan nodded thoughtfully, storing each answer in his mind like treasure. He began to understand that the drills were not just about precision, they were about patience, perseverance, and pride in one's work. Then came the most exciting part of the visit. Sergeant Thompson offered Ethan the chance to participate in a small drill just for him. Ethan's eyes widened with amazement. He had watched the guards for hours, memorized their steps, and now he had the opportunity to try for himself. Carefully, he followed the instructions, placing his feet in the exact positions, raising his arms at the right angles, and stepping in rhythm. At first, his movements were slightly uneven, but with gentle guidance from the guards, he gradually improved. Each correction was offered with kindness, never criticism, and Ethan felt a growing sense of pride with every step he mastered. His parents watched with hearts full of emotion. They had seen their son face challenges before, but this was different. Here, he was learning something completely new, outside of his comfort zone, and he was succeeding. His smile grew wider with each successful step, and his laughter rang out softly in the quiet courtyard. The guards clapped and encouraged him, making him feel as if he were truly part of their team, even for just a few magical moments. Ethan's confidence soared, and for the first time in a long time he felt completely capable and included. After the drill, Sergeant Thompson invited Ethan to try on the ceremonial hat again and hold the sword. This time, Ethan approached the task with more confidence, carefully lifting the hat onto his head and adjusting it just as he had seen the guards do. The sword felt heavy in his hands, but he held it steadily, proud of his balance and focus. He walked a few steps, mimicking the guards' march, and Sergeant Thompson nodded approvingly. Ethan's heart swelled with joy. In that moment, he was not just a boy visiting the palace. He was a participant in a world he had admired for so long, and he had earned the respect of the very people he had looked up to. The morning continued with small, meaningful interactions. Ethan asked about the history of the palace, the meaning behind the colors of the uniforms, and the traditions that had been passed down through generations of guards. The guards answered every question patiently, sharing stories and details in a way that was both educational and fascinating. Ethan took notes and sketched diagrams in his notebook, wanting to remember every detail. He asked thoughtful questions about how the guards trained, how they stayed focused during long ceremonies, and how they learned to move in perfect harmony with one another. The guards smiled at his curiosity, appreciating the depth of his interest. At one point, Ethan noticed a small bird perched on the edge of the courtyard wall. He paused, pointing it out to Sergeant Thompson and asking if the guards ever saw animals during their duties. The sergeant laughed softly and said that while it was rare, sometimes birds or squirrels would wander into the courtyard, and the guards would quietly continue their work without disturbing them. Ethan's eyes lit up with delight. Even in a world so structured and precise, there was still room for small surprises and moments of beauty. He realized that the guards' world, though disciplined, was not without kindness, observation, and appreciation for the little things. As the visit drew toward its end, Sergeant Thompson knelt beside Ethan once more. He spoke in a gentle voice, praising the boy for his courage, curiosity, and attention to detail. "You did wonderfully today, Ethan," he said. "Remember, the world is full of challenges, but if you approach them with patience and a willing heart, you can achieve anything you set your mind to." Ethan's chest swelled with pride. He felt a deep sense of accomplishment, not just for completing the drill, but for the respect and trust he had earned from the guards. Before leaving, the guards presented Ethan with a small, symbolic token, a miniature badge resembling the ceremonial insignia worn by the guards. It was simple yet meaningful, a reminder of his experience and the special connection he had formed. Ethan held the badge carefully in his hands, feeling its weight and significance. He promised himself that he would treasure it forever, not just as a souvenir, but as a symbol of courage, learning, and kindness. His parents watched, tears of pride and joy in their eyes, knowing that this day had given their son an experience that would stay with him for the rest of his life. On the drive home, Ethan could hardly contain his excitement. He recounted every moment, the drill, the questions he had asked, the stories from the guards, and the moment he held the sword and wore the hat. His parents listened attentively, smiling at the depth of his understanding and the pride in his voice. They realized that this visit had been transformative. Ethan was not just happy, he was inspired. He had learned patience, focus, and courage in a way that was both meaningful and memorable. That evening, back at home, Ethan carefully placed his miniature badge on his desk and opened his notebook. He began to draw again, this time with even greater detail than before. He sketched the guards' uniforms, the ceremonial steps, and himself practicing the drill with focus and determination. Each line and shading captured not just the physical details, but the feelings he had experienced: excitement, pride, joy, and a deep sense of connection. Sarah and Daniel watched quietly from the doorway, overwhelmed by the growth and happiness they saw in their son. Ethan paused for a moment, looking at his drawings with satisfaction. He whispered softly, "I want to learn more, I want to be like them someday." His parents smiled, understanding that while Ethan might not become a ceremonial guard, the lessons he had learned, discipline, patience, confidence, and kindness, were far more important. These qualities would guide him through life, helping him face challenges with courage and embrace new experiences with curiosity and joy. Before going to bed, Ethan carefully placed the badge and his notebook on his bedside table. He lay down, still holding the small token close to his chest. As he drifted off to sleep, he dreamed of marching alongside the guards, stepping in perfect rhythm and feeling proud of himself. He dreamed of a world where kindness and patience opened doors to new opportunities, and where every small act of recognition could make a boy feel brave, capable, and important. In his dreams, the palace was a place of magic, connection, and joy, a world where he belonged, even if only for a few unforgettable moments. And as the night deepened, the memory of Sergeant Thompson's gentle smile, the polished boots, and the ceremonial sword stayed with Ethan. It became more than just a memory. It became a symbol of possibility, courage, and the priceless value of simple, thoughtful gestures. After that unforgettable visit to the palace, Ethan's world seemed a little brighter. He carried the memories of the ceremonial guards with him everywhere he went, and even small tasks in daily life began to feel more meaningful. Mornings started with careful routines, but now he moved through them with a sense of purpose and pride, inspired by the discipline and patience he had observed in the guards. His parents noticed a change, not in his personality, which was naturally gentle and curious, but in the way he faced challenges. He seemed more confident, more willing to try new things, and even more curious about the world around him. At school, Ethan shared his experiences with his teachers and a few close friends. He described the ceremonial drills, the precision of the guards' movements, and the special moments when he had been allowed to participate. He showed them his sketches and his notebook, explaining every detail with excitement and pride. Some students had never paid much attention to the idea of discipline or practice before, but listening to Ethan made them curious. They asked questions about the palace and the guards, about what it felt like to hold a ceremonial sword, and about the miniature badge he had received. Ethan answered carefully, his voice full of enthusiasm, yet calm and clear, showing that he had learned to communicate his experiences thoughtfully. His teachers were impressed too. They noticed that Ethan had become more focused in class and more willing to participate in activities that previously made him anxious. He asked questions, followed instructions carefully, and even offered help to classmates who needed guidance in group tasks. They began to understand that the palace visit had given him a boost of confidence and a sense of belonging that extended far beyond that single day. It wasn't just a memory, it was a turning point in his social and emotional growth. Even at home, the ripple effects of his palace experience were visible. Ethan began to approach household tasks with a sense of responsibility he hadn't shown before. He helped set the table for dinner, organized his room meticulously, and even took care of his small plants, remembering the patience the guards had shown while performing their drills. Sarah and Daniel encouraged him, praising his efforts and reinforcing the idea that discipline and care could lead to pride and accomplishment. They noticed that Ethan smiled more often, laughed more freely, and carried himself with a quiet confidence that made them proud. One weekend, Ethan's family invited his grandparents to visit. Ethan eagerly showed them his drawings, sketches of the ceremonial guards, and the miniature badge he had received. He explained every detail, from the polished boots to the synchronized steps of the drills. His grandparents listened with delight, asking questions and encouraging him to talk about how he had felt during the visit. Ethan's eyes sparkled as he described the pride, excitement, and joy he had experienced. It was clear that the visit had not only impacted him personally, but had also inspired those around him, creating a small community of understanding and admiration. The story of Ethan and the palace guards even began to spread among the neighborhood children. One day, a few friends asked if they could join Ethan on a special walk to the local park, where he wanted to demonstrate some of the marching drills he had learned. He was thrilled to share, guiding them carefully through the steps he had practiced with Sergeant Thompson. The children laughed and tried their best to follow his instructions, and Ethan's patience shone as he corrected them gently and encouraged them. He felt proud to share what he had learned, and his friends admired his knowledge and dedication. Ethan's parents realized that this ripple effect was more powerful than they had imagined. A simple gesture from the King's Guard had created not only a magical memory for their son, but it also encouraged him to connect, teach, and inspire others. Sarah and Daniel began to see the broader impact of kindness and inclusion. They understood that when someone notices and values a child, especially a child who experiences the world differently, it can build confidence that touches every aspect of their life. They felt grateful to Sergeant Thompson and the entire guard for giving Ethan this priceless gift. As weeks passed, Ethan continued to draw and write about his palace experience. He created detailed step-by-step guides of the drills, explaining the meaning behind each movement. He even made a small presentation for his class, showing the sketches, explaining the history of the ceremonial guards, and talking about how patience, discipline, and kindness were part of every step. His classmates were fascinated, and many expressed admiration for the guards and for Ethan's dedication to learning and sharing. Ethan felt proud, not because of the attention, but because he had a chance to share something meaningful from his heart. At home, the conversations often returned to the palace. Ethan would ask questions about the history of the royal guards, the traditions behind the ceremonies, and the lessons they had learned from years of practice. His parents answered as best they could, sometimes looking up details to satisfy his curiosity. Ethan's questions were thoughtful and full of insight, showing that his mind was absorbing lessons far beyond simple admiration. He was learning values like perseverance, patience, and respect for others, and he applied them in his interactions at school, with friends, and at home. One evening, Ethan and his parents went for a walk in the neighborhood. He noticed a small group of children trying to organize a game but struggling to coordinate their movements. Ethan stepped forward, quietly offering guidance. He suggested they move in rhythm, pay attention to timing, and encourage each other just as he had learned from the guards. The children followed his advice, and soon laughter filled the air as they successfully coordinated their game. Ethan's parents watched from a distance, proud of how he was applying lessons from his palace experience in real life. It was a simple moment, yet it reflected the profound effect of kindness, inclusion, and attention to detail on a young mind. Ethan's confidence continued to grow in other areas as well. At a community event, he approached adults politely to ask questions about their work, expressing curiosity and interest without hesitation. The adults were impressed by his manners, focus, and willingness to learn. They praised him, and Ethan felt a quiet pride, understanding that learning and patience could lead to positive recognition in every part of life. Each small interaction, each moment of engagement, became a building block for his self-esteem. Even small challenges, which had once caused him anxiety, were now approached with calm determination. If a task seemed difficult or unfamiliar, Ethan would take a deep breath, recall the lessons he had learned from the guards, and break the challenge into smaller, manageable steps. Whether it was solving a tricky puzzle, trying a new activity, or speaking in front of a small group, Ethan applied patience, focus, and determination. His parents noticed that setbacks no longer discouraged him as much. They became opportunities to learn and grow, just as he had learned to do during the ceremonial drills. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan's story became an inspiration to others. Friends, neighbors, teachers, and family members began to notice how a single act of recognition and kindness from Sergeant Thompson and the guards had created a lasting, positive impact. They saw how a thoughtful gesture could boost confidence, nurture curiosity, and encourage personal growth in a young person. For Ethan, it was never about recognition or praise. It was about feeling valued, included, and capable. Yet the effect of that feeling radiated outward, inspiring everyone around him. Even at home, Sarah and Daniel reflected on the ripple effect. They realized that the power of kindness extended far beyond one moment or one person. By noticing Ethan, encouraging him, and including him in something meaningful, the guards had not only changed their son's life, but had also created a wave of inspiration that touched family, friends, and the community. It was a lesson they would carry with them forever. That patience, understanding, and a simple gesture could have lasting, transformative effects. Ethan continued to dream of the palace, but now his dreams were filled with more than admiration. They included a sense of responsibility. He wanted to use the lessons he had learned to help others, to share patience, kindness, and encouragement whenever he could. He realized that the magic of the guards was not just in the uniforms, the drills, or the ceremonies. It was in their ability to see a young boy, understand his curiosity, and make him feel valued. Ethan wanted to do the same for others in his own small ways. One sunny afternoon, Ethan returned to the notebook where he kept sketches of the palace and the ceremonial guards. He carefully added new details, including his own interpretations of the lessons he had learned. Each line and note reflected not only the physical actions he had observed, but also the emotional lessons, the courage to try, the patience to practice, and the kindness to connect. These drawings became more than artwork. They became a record of growth, inspiration, and the ripple effect of one unforgettable, thoughtful gesture. By the end of Part 4, it was clear that the impact of the King's Guard on Ethan was far greater than anyone could have imagined. A single act of recognition had blossomed into confidence, curiosity, social connection, and inspiration. Ethan was growing into a young person who understood that patience, kindness, and courage were not abstract ideas. They were actions, choices, and habits that could change lives. And for those around him, it became a reminder that the smallest gestures could create ripples of joy, growth, and transformation that extended far beyond the initial moment. Months had passed since Ethan's unforgettable visits to the palace, and the memories of those days still sparkled brightly in his mind. Every time he looked at the miniature badge, the ceremonial sword he had held, or the sketches in his notebook, he felt a warm sense of pride and joy. But beyond the memories, the experience had changed something deep inside him. Ethan no longer felt anxious in the same ways he once did. Small challenges that had previously worried him now seemed manageable because he had learned the value of patience, focus, and courage. He had discovered that sometimes the kindness and attention of others could give him the confidence to face new experiences. One morning, Ethan's parents noticed him standing by his desk, staring thoughtfully at his notebook. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked softly. Ethan smiled, turning the pages to show sketches of guards, ceremonial drills, and even little notes about what he had learned emotionally. "I'm thinking about how to help others feel happy, like Sergeant Thompson made me feel," he said quietly. "I want to share what I've learned with other kids who might be nervous or shy." His parents exchanged a glance, proud and touched by his thoughtful heart. They realized that Ethan had absorbed far more than the visual spectacle of the palace. He had understood the deeper lessons of empathy, encouragement, and inclusion. Ethan's parents decided to help him put his ideas into action. Together, they organized a small gathering at a local community center for neighborhood children. Ethan was excited, but also a little nervous. He remembered how he had felt when he first approached the guards, unsure of what to do or how he would be received. But now he carried a quiet confidence. With his notebook, sketches, and miniature badge, he stood before the group and began to explain the ceremonial drills, the history of the guards, and most importantly, the lessons he had learned about patience, courage, and kindness. At first, the children listened quietly, some fidgeting or whispering to each other. But soon, Ethan's enthusiasm and gentle guidance drew them in. He demonstrated the marching steps, showing them how to move with rhythm and focus. He encouraged each child to try, praising their efforts and correcting mistakes with patience. The children laughed, stumbled, and tried again, and with every attempt their confidence grew. Ethan's eyes shone with pride and joy, knowing that he was helping them experience the same sense of accomplishment he had felt at the palace. Even the parents who had come to watch were impressed. They saw how Ethan, a boy who once struggled with confidence in new situations, was now leading, teaching, and inspiring others. His calm demeanor, patience, and enthusiasm were contagious. One mother whispered to another, "Look at him. He's teaching them more than steps. He's showing them courage and patience." And indeed, that was exactly what Ethan was doing. Through his gentle encouragement and thoughtful teaching, he was passing on the lessons he had received from the guards, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond the palace walls. After the session, Ethan sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on the morning. He looked at the smiling faces of the children, some of whom had struggled at first but now felt proud and capable. He realized that the joy he had felt at the palace, the thrill of learning, the sense of inclusion, and the pride in trying something new, was even more meaningful when shared with others. The feeling of helping someone else grow, just as he had been helped, filled him with a warm happiness that he could not have imagined before. Ethan's parents watched silently, hearts full of pride. They knew that the palace experience had been transformative. It had not only boosted Ethan's confidence, but it also taught him the value of giving, empathy, and sharing knowledge. They realized that Sergeant Thompson and the King's Guard had given their son something far greater than a tour or a souvenir. They had given him a sense of self-worth, courage, and the belief that he could make a positive difference in the world. As the months continued, Ethan continued to grow and thrive. At school, he participated more actively in group projects, encouraged his classmates, and even helped organize small events. He shared stories from the palace during lessons on history and culture, inspiring his peers to appreciate tradition, discipline, and teamwork. Teachers noticed his growing leadership skills, his patience with others, and his thoughtful communication. Ethan had transformed from a quiet, observant boy into someone who could engage, inspire, and uplift those around him. Even at home, the lessons from the palace continued to resonate. Ethan helped with household chores, approached tasks with careful attention, and encouraged his younger siblings to practice patience and focus. He often referenced the guards, discipline, and perseverance, reminding his family that careful effort and patience were important in every part of life. His parents marveled at the depth of his growth. They realized that the kindness and recognition shown by the King's Guard had planted seeds of confidence and empathy that continued to bloom every day. Ethan's bond with the guards also remained strong. He wrote letters to Sergeant Thompson, describing his daily experiences, the things he had learned, and the ways he had shared his knowledge with friends and family. The sergeant wrote back with encouragement, praising Ethan's growth and reminding him that courage and kindness were the greatest achievements of all. These letters became treasured keepsakes, reinforcing Ethan's sense of connection and the lasting impact of that initial act of recognition. One special evening, Ethan's family gathered to celebrate a small milestone. Ethan had organized a neighborhood activity, teaching children how to follow a rhythm, move together, and encourage each other. As the children laughed and played, Ethan's parents looked on with pride. Sarah whispered to Daniel, "Look at him." The guards didn't just teach him steps, they helped him discover his own courage and kindness. Daniel nodded, agreeing wholeheartedly. They realized that the value of the experience was far greater than they had imagined. It was a gift that kept giving, influencing not only Ethan but everyone he touched. As Ethan lay in bed that night, he held his miniature badge close to his heart and reflected on the journey. He thought about the palace gates, the polished boots, the ceremonial drills, and most importantly, the gentle nod and smile from Sergeant Thompson that had made him feel seen. He understood now that the magic of that day was not in the uniforms, the swords, or the ceremonies. It was in the kindness, patience, and recognition that had been extended to him. He realized that every small act of care could create ripples, touching hearts and inspiring confidence in ways that lasted far longer than anyone could imagine. Ethan closed his eyes and whispered softly, "I want to be like them, kind, patient, and brave." In that moment, he felt a sense of purpose and hope that warmed him from head to toe. He understood that life was full of challenges and uncertainties, But with courage, patience, and kindness, he could navigate them and make a positive impact on others. The lessons he had learned were not just for ceremonial drills, they were for life itself. In the days that followed, Ethan continued to explore his passions and share what he had learned. He drew, wrote, and taught with renewed confidence. Every time he faced a new challenge, he remembered the guards, patience, the careful attention they gave him, and the encouragement that had made him feel important. Each day became an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to help others grow alongside him. Ethan's story eventually inspired others outside his immediate circle. Friends, neighbors, and even local teachers began to recognize the power of small gestures of kindness. They saw how acknowledging someone's curiosity, encouraging them patiently, and including them in meaningful experiences could create lasting confidence and joy. What had started as a single, thoughtful act by Sergeant Thompson and the King's Guard had blossomed into a ripple effect, touching lives far beyond the palace walls. One quiet evening, Ethan sat by the window, looking at the moonlight reflecting softly across his desk. He held his badge, glanced at his sketches, and smiled. He thought about the guards, the palace, and the lessons he had learned. Then he picked up his notebook and began to write a message, not for anyone in particular, but for himself. Be brave, be patient, be kind. Every small act can change a life, including your own. It was a simple message, but it carried all the wisdom, joy, and inspiration of his journey. And so, Ethan's story came full circle. From the nervous boy standing at the palace gates, to the confident young man sharing his knowledge and kindness with others, he had grown in ways no one could have predicted. He had learned that courage was not about being the strongest or the fastest. It was about trying, learning, and connecting with others. He had learned that patience could transform fear into confidence, and that kindness had the power to create ripples that extended far beyond a single moment. Ethan drifted off to sleep that night, the miniature badge resting safely on his bedside table. In his dreams, he saw the palace gates, the ceremonial guards, and the countless small moments of connection, recognition, and joy. And in his heart, he knew that he had been given a gift more valuable than any sword or uniform, the gift of courage, kindness, and the knowledge that even the smallest gestures could leave a lasting mark on the world.